Spartacus fans out there? Yeah? How about Slade Wilson fans? Please welcome to the main stage, Manu Bennett!
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What's up, Manu?
I don't know, I'm wondering who wants to learn how to do the haka.
These guys, those guys, these guys?
How many people, I'm a New Zealand Maori, and a lot of people ask me about what I sort of do when I get into my warrior roles and stuff like that. So I want to just see whether anybody out here wants to learn what I do, which is called the haka. Okay, stand up if you want to learn it. You have to follow the instructions, okay? You're dedicating yourself to this now, okay? Okay, how am I going to do this? Okay, I need this half of the room to face that half of the room. And this half of the room, you have to face that half of the room. Now see, this is what would be a tribal standoff. So I'm going to make somebody here, you're the chief of this side. Okay, this guy's your chief, and...
Can I be the chief of this side?
No, this lady, Actually, you know what? You're fantastic, but I'm going to get this woman here in the red because she's got more space. Come up the front here. Okay, you got to stay on your side, and you got to stay on your side, okay? Now, the haka really is about releasing your soul to war. Okay, so the idea of it was that, okay, if we're mortal and we think about our sort of domestic bliss, then that's not the headspace you've got to be in when you go into war. So the idea of the haka is to actually release your soul, you know, the warrior within. So you've got to try to let it all go and just face the enemy and give them your all. Okay, now, the position of the haka is just a squat like this. I know it's going to be hard while you're in the rows there. But you squat like this, and basically you're just rhythmically using both hands to slap your legs. Now, come on. I saw somebody sitting down over there. You got to commit to this. Okay. Now, the words, keep doing it. The words are kamate, kamate. Can you repeat that? That means, am I going to die?
It's uplifting.
Truly. It's kamate, kamate. Now look at the person, look at somebody on the other side there, and just look at them and go, kamate, kamate. Like that. Okay, so, and then the next word is kaora, kaora, which means, am I going to live? So you're asking yourself the question, am I going to die or am I going to live? So you go, kamate, kamate, kora, kora. Can you do that? Now, you're not scaring me at all, any of you.
But you're scaring me, Manu.
No, but it's...
That's...
No, but this is I'm trying to get you guys into it. You're going to hear the difference. Everybody who's just witnessing this, you'll hear the difference if you guys find your center and your warrior soul. I really want you to try to do it, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you into the haka. There's a sort of a lead-in phrase that goes, Kiamo, which is you drop to the position and you start the slapping. And then I'll start leading the chant. But now I want you to leave everything behind and face your enemy. Leave everything behind. Just face your enemy. Try to really ground yourself. You're doing this for the Maoris. Come on. Ikiamo! Kamate, kamate, kora. Utenete tanata. Uru nana itikim. Fakafititera. Ahupane. Akopane. Ahupane kopane fititera.
And then you poke your tongue out.
You go like this with your tongue.
That was pretty good.
Okay, you guys need a few lessons, but that's what we call the haka. If you see about 100 men and women do that in New Zealand, you'll see the energy that can go to, and it's actually a really wonderful release. But anyway, that was the haka.
I thought they did really well for
Fantastic,
a first attempt.
I did it in Germany with about 2,000 people in a room, and everybody did it. And it was actually one of the loudest hakas I'd ever heard. These guys were just going nuts.
Well,
Now that I told you that, you want to try it again?
Well, let's talk about, I mean, I think it's really interesting that we started off the panel like that. Obviously, a ton of your roles are like physically very strong warriors. Crixus in particular, by the way, huge Spartacus fan, huge fan of you on that show. And I want you to know that I'm such a fan that I purchased for Geek Nation offices. I have one of the original Spartacus shields hanging in our podcast room.
Awesome, darling.
So,
well, that's my shield. Can I have it back?
No.
The funny thing is when the show was finishing, everybody wanted to get their costumes and their swords and the pieces of equipment they'd used throughout the series. And our producer basically said to us, "Don't even ask, because Stars is planning to sell the whole lot."
And I was like their demographic to buy it, I guess.
No, the whole lot ended up on eBay, and they sold everything off. So we were sort of madly trying to steal things off set in the last couple of episodes.
Yeah.
I took Liam, Liam who played the second Spartacus. I sort of walked past him on the last day, and I just took the knife out of his heel, and he went, "What are you doing?" I said,
You're like, "That's mine now."
"I'm having something." Yeah.
So when you prepared for the Crixus initial audition, was this part of your preparation?
You know what? I've always, whatever role that I've ever gone for, I think, getting into that physical shape, getting into the mindset of the warrior has always been something very important for me, to be going to the gym and doing all the sort of training necessary. But yeah, the haka is something that's integral to who I am as a Maori, and so, when I try to find the stimulation to play these roles, I have to sort of look within, look at what I have in my bag of tools, cultural bag of tools. So I used to always do the haka like prior to my battle scenes on Spartacus, and all the guys would be like, "Oh, there goes Manu again with his haka." But I just found that was the way to really anchor myself. Like my great grandfather was a guy called Pokiha Taranui. If you look it up on your phone, if you want to, anybody, it's POK. Have a look. Yeah, do it now. It's POKIHA. Pokiha, and then his second name is TARANUI. And you'll now press images, and you'll see a photo of my great grandfather and grandmother holding two weapons. And he was like a badass warrior. This guy. So I don't know. Like, I was born into a generation where I'm not involved in these sorts of conflicts, but I think somehow through Wairoa, we have this thing in the Maori sort of culture called Wairoa, where we believe that the spiritual sort of continuance is always happening. So I always sort of refer back to that as my point of,
like, your point of origin.
Yeah,
that's your
trying to anchor
origin
that
story.
warrior,
I like it.
spirit in. Yeah.
So
Who saw the picture? Pretty badass, eh? Look at my great grandmother. She would have fought because she's holding a weapon. So yeah, amazing lady.
So with Spartacus, what was the sort of audition process like for that?
Well, Spartacus was really interesting because about a year prior to Spartacus, I'd sort of got to a point where I'd done 2 WWE movies. I'd worked with John Cena on The Marine, then I got to work with Stone Cold Steve Austin on The Condemned. And I shot both of those movies in Australia, and I was sort of looking for a vessel to try to make my way into the American market, And I got cast to play this UFC fighter called Mark Kerr. Has anybody heard of Mark Kerr? Yeah, you know the documentary that he did called The Smashing Machine? Well, I was in a gym sort of working out one day, and a friend came up and gave me this documentary and said, "Take this home and watch it. It's really full on." And it was a quite a harrowing story about this guy, Mark Kerr, who was an All-American wrestler, who became one of the first big names in the UFC, way back when the rules were very, very brutal. I mean, they've changed the rules a lot now, you know, for safety reasons, obviously, because these guys were pretty much, you know, gladiators, you know, and there was just a lot of you know, danger in the sport at that time. And but when I watched this particular doco, I was just mesmerized by it. And the next morning, my American manager rang me up and said, "I've got an audition for you for this thing called The Smashing Machine." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." I literally watched it last night as a DVD, and it's like, you know, it's a very ambiguous kind of DVD to come into your hands at any time. And so
That's so weird.
it was very
That's
weird.
really weird.
But I then started putting together sort of an audition tape for it, and the producers were like, "No, you know, this guy hasn't got a name. We're going to look for a big name actor." And I didn't think it was going to go my way, but I kind of made this sort of fight video with all these MMA guys, and worked on the voice of the character Mark Kerr. And I sent it off, and eventually we convinced the producers into casting me in the role. I actually got from, like, I'm 85 kilos right now, and I got to 105.
Wow.
Like, people thought that I was kind of cut on Spartacus, but for this particular role, I got really, really massive. And so I flew over to South Africa to film it. And does anybody know who Fedor Emelianenko is? The Pride fighter? Yeah, well, Fedor was going to be in it, and as was Shogun Rua and a few guys. So I was going to get to fight with some of the best fighters in the world. And I was so looking forward to this opportunity. And Van Damme was meant to play Mark Coleman in this particular film, who was Mark Kerr's coach. And when we got to South Africa to film this thing, Van Damme didn't show up, like 2 days before filming. And the whole film got called off, and I didn't have a penny left to my name because I'd spent everything I possibly had, you know, to try to get that role. And so I had to go back to Australia, and I was just absolutely broke. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you know, just come and work on a building site. You know, we can hire you as a builder's laborer." So I did that for a full year. And I remember I was digging out like this swimming pool in this person's backyard, you know, for about 2 months. I was digging this big hole. And my manager was ringing me up going, "Manu, are you still in your hole?" And I was going like, yeah, and it's sort of getting deeper. and then finally she rang up and she said, "Manu, there's a show called Spartacus." And and she said, "It's a gladiator kind of, you know, show that's come up." And she said, "I'm going to send you in there to read for Spartacus." And so I went in, and when I walked into the agency, there was all these 18-year-old boys were in the hallway, you know, all going, "I am Spartacus," you know. And I walked in, and the casting agent said to me, "Manu, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to read for Spartacus." And she goes, No, you're way too old." You know, I mean, at the time I was like, I think I was 30, I think I was 39, maybe 40.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Oh, really?" And she goes, yeah. No, Spartacus and all those characters were all in their late teens, early 20s. So yeah, but we'll put you on tape. You know, I'll send it in, whatever. So I was really dejected about the idea of even.
You're like, this is not going
being
well
there.
for me.
And so I went on. I just did this audition for the camera, and about 2 months later, she rang me up and she goes, "Manu, they actually really liked your take, and they're actually now looking at casting older characters." I think because, you know, back in the day of Spartacus, you know, kids at the age of 19 would have just seen so much. You know, we're in a bit of a protected kind of scenario these days. Mind you, there's a lot of young boys probably here that have done military, but you know, they just decided to go a little bit older. So they brought me in and they read me for Enemeus, you know, who Peter Mensa played, you know, and so I auditioned for that. Then like 2 weeks later they said no, and then they called me in for Barker, and that would have been interesting. But you know, that didn't happen either. And but the thing with Barker is they were going to fly me across to America to screen test for Barker. On the night before, they rang up and they said, "Oh no, sorry, they're going to kill that character now in the 4th episode, and they're going to cast it locally out of New Zealand." So I missed out on that role, and I just didn't, it was kind of like this roller coaster thing where I kept on just missing out on
And it took like
things.
months. It was drug out too. It sounds like.
Oh, it was a long process, and it kept on being like all these disappointments. But then they rang up and they asked me whether I wanted to, whether I'd come in and read for Crixus. And it was funny when I heard that word, it just kind of there was something strange about,
Yeah.
just that name. And I kind of, I went in and I did this audition. And I got sent away, and it was about probably another month later, they rang up and they said, "Okay, Manu, they want to screen test you for this now. It looks like they like what you're doing, but they're looking at a couple of guys in England, I think. So just going. So I got up this particular morning and I got myself ready and I did the haka and I went swimming in this sort of in these ocean baths, and I got there and I was really centered, and they said, and when I got into to the casting agency, there was nobody there, and I walked in and I was sort of walking around and there was just nobody there, and then suddenly one of the casting ladies came down. She says, "Manu, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to do my screen test for Crixus." And she said, "It's been cancelled. Like your agent had a bad fallout with the producers because they wanted to get a back end deal for me, like on royalties and stuff like that." And I was like, "What?" And they said, "No, they've cancelled it. You're going to have to ring up your agent and because they'll explain it to you, but it's over. And I got out and I sort of started walking away from this casting agency, and I rang up my manager and I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Oh, we're just trying to get you some royalties," and they got really annoyed and kind of told us to bugger off. So I was like, can you please ring them up, because I would do this job for nothing. It's such an amazing opportunity. Please ring up somebody and turn this around.
Fix it.
And I'd walked almost all the way home, and suddenly I got a call from the casting agent. She was like, "You have to be back here in 5 minutes," and I've only got like a minute to film you, so come back. And I had to turn around and run back to the casting agency. And it was a really hot day, and I was sweating profusely, and my head was just spinning around. And I got in there, and she said, "Okay, Manu, quick, we've got to do this quickly." And I just remember how intense this emotion was inside of myself because of what had happened with Smashing Machine, and this was not the way I planned on doing this particular audition, but it was kind of like a moment, it was a moment where I swear to you, it could have slid away and I could have panicked and not hit it, but I absolutely nailed it. I don't know, there was so much emotion involved in that moment. It built me into this, it was a fight for my life. It really was. And I looked into this camera and I just delivered as I walked out, I went, "I think I'll get this."
Yeah. That's the magic
yeah.
moment of an actor, when everything sort of comes together and you're able to just let go of the whole, it's the suspension of disbelief that you want to give others, but you actually give it to yourself in those moments.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes you go in and you feel great when you go for an audition, but you just won't have that amount of emotional capacity in you at the time, and you think you're okay, but you don't have it there, and you sort of hit it at 80%. Whereas sometimes if you get really shaken up before an audition by something, anything, it helps you get that energy,
Yeah, it was amazing. We'll talk more about Spartacus, but I want you to know that even though you're in the DC universe, you have a Stan Lee connection. If anyone was at the Stan Lee panel, he was asked, "What is your favorite character that you have never created?" And guess what his answer was? Deathstroke.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So you should. He also whispered the other one to me too, but he also said Darkseid. But it's a compliment from the man himself, and I'm sure you guys would love to talk about that, right? So if you guys have questions, you can line up at the mic right there. And in the meantime, why don't we kind of talk about, Slade and Deathstroke, and when you came onto the show and the evolution of the character, and then obviously it differed from the comics and how you felt about that. Can we just kind of touch on that?
Well, the crazy thing about auditioning for Slade Wilson was that I'd just been in Kuwait, and I did a USO tour, and we went over and we saw some of the army guys. Yeah, that was awesome. It was really awesome. Yeah, the military were, I think all of the the various kind of, fire brigades, police forces, all this sort of stuff. All these guys that are grouped together as brothers, they loved Spartacus. And so when I went to Kuwait, I went in front of Camp Arafjan, I think I was at, and it's the base where everyone flies out to go up to Afghanistan and whatnot. So I was meeting all these young, really, young guys on their way into the hot zone. And it just fascinated me looking at these young men, and I just wanted to know who was the most experienced out of all of them. And so I said, who's Rambo? Who's the Rambo of your group? And they pointed out this guy called Knight, and this guy came up, and I was going, wow, man, I can't even start to figure that you guys think that I play Crixus, the warrior, but I'm in a studio and they call cut as soon as something dangerous happens, but you're out there in the real thing. So it's amazing that your energy is something that I try to mimic, and I said, if you're caught in a sort of a scenario where you're going into those sort of night vision kind of scenarios that we watch on YouTube, and you're going in quietly, I mean, how do you stay calm and take people out as you go through? And he grabbed me in a chokehold in front of this whole group of soldiers, and they're all looking, oh, he's got Crixus. But I think he just wanted to show that he was the real deal and that I was an actor. It was interesting. But he grabbed me in this chokehold, and I started going automatically, and I grabbed him as hard as I could by his. I was just fighting for survival.
You had no other choice.
I just went, and he told me that he couldn't feel anything for a couple of days, and he said it was a good reaction. But it was funny because then I sort of had really bad jet lag when I was there, and all the guys had 5-hour energy drinks in their packs, those little sort of caffeine things. And so when I was there, Knight gave me a couple of these, when I was going around doing these long days, and then finally on the day that I left, he took me to the airport personally, and as I went to walk away from him, he said, "Manu," and he held up this 5-hour energy drink, and he said, "Something to remember me by." And it was just weird. I took this 5-hour, funny, classic, thanks for the headlock. See you later night, And I flew over to LA, and I was only in LA for 2 days before I was going to go to the Hobbit premiere back in New Zealand. And when I was on the day that I was going to fly out, the second day in LA, my manager rang me. She said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm just about to go to the airport." She said, "Can you go in and read for this show, Arrow?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the one Stephen Amell's in." Because I knew Stephen, because Stephen actually came and auditioned for Spartacus. When they were replacing the Spartacus, Stephen was one of 4 guys that flew over to New Zealand to try out for the role, but Liam McIntyre ended up with the role. But I knew him, and I remember seeing his billboard as I came into LA on that trip and going like, "Oh, there's Steve's new show, the Arrow." So it was kind of serendipitous. And so I went along to this casting studio, and they gave me this I had to cold read, and it says Slade Wilson drops through the ceiling and jumps up behind Oliver and grabs him in a chokehold. And I was like, wow. But sorry, I've got to go back one step. When I arrived at the casting agency, I felt really, I was seriously jet lagged, and I had no energy, and I thought, oh, Knight gave me that 5-hour energy drink. So I went round to my trunk and got this bag out and took out the 5-hour energy drink. I swear to you, when I auditioned for Arrow, I was on Mirakuru. Because I took this thing, and I walked in, and I was kind of like, reading this thing. I was going, wow, it's a chokehold. That's incredible. And then when I went into the casting room, I said, "Listen, can I have the reader come in front of the camera?" I don't know whether some people might have heard this story. How many people know this story?
I do, but I love it.
Oh, this is great that you don't know. I thought you might have heard about this. Can I get the guy with the orange shirt to come up here?
Uh-oh.
Hey, how are you, brother? Anyway, so yeah, you're okay, mate. That's what I told the reader as well. And I said, and I was like, this 5-hour energy drink was really hitting me, and I was like, oh yeah. He said, "You ready?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." And anyway, who remembers the first scene that Slade Wilson dropped behind Oliver? And he grabs him with a chokehold, and the line is, "You got 10 seconds to tell me something I believe, kid, or I'm going to cut out your throat box." And it was funny because as I was sitting outside hearing other people do this dialogue, all I could hear were guys doing it really angrily. Like I was sitting outside and I'd hear this guy auditioning and he's going, "You got 10 seconds to tell me something I believe, kid. I'm going to cut out your throat box." And I was like, it's not very subtle. But then I thought about when Knight had me in the chokehold back in Kuwait, he'd whispered in my ear really softly. He'd just gone, "Just relax." And so I thought I'd use that tone. Knight gave me the 5-hour energy drink, he gave me the chokehold, and he gave me the voice that I used in this audition. Like, I always thank him for it. I'm still in contact with him. But anyway, so the guy's in front of me, and I grab him in this chokehold, and I'm like, "Yeah, just hold my arm so it doesn't choke you." And I'm like, oh. Yeah, good reaction. Funny. And so I'm like, "Kid, you've got 10 seconds to tell me something I believe, or I'm going to cut out your throat box." At which point, the guy fell onto the ground. You can do it, you can just fall. The guy fell onto the ground unconscious. And I've kind of looked up at David Rappaport, who's like one of the main casting agents in Hollywood. And I've gone, "Is this part of the script?" And he's gone, "No, I think you just choked the reader out." And I was like, "Are you okay, kid? Hey, yo, jump up, jump." And he sort of did something like that. But he got up, and thank you very much, mate. And David Rappaport, I don't think there's any way down, brother. But anyway, David Rappaport told the guy to go wash his face, and then he looked at me, and I really thought I was in big trouble. I didn't think I was going to get another audition in LA ever again. And I went, "Listen, I'm sorry, Dave. Honestly, I've just been in Kuwait, and I met a Special Forces guy, and this is a Special Forces guy, right? And he showed me that chokehold, which is in your script, and obviously it works." So you got to excuse me. I just kind of like, I just wanted to put everything into this, and I knew the energy of this guy, and I just tried to apply it, and maybe a little bit too much. But and David said to me, "Manu, come and take a look at this." So I went around the back of the camera, and we're looking at it, and see, I got the guy, and the guy's eyes go like this, and he falls unconscious on the ground. And David said, "You know what? That was really electric, and it was exactly what we were looking for. You actually brought a huge reality to this, and we haven't seen it yet. So I think you're in for a chance. You're in with a chance." So I kind of walked out, and I was just wondering whether he was lying to me and just wanted to get me out of the room. And my manager rang, and I said, "I choked out the reader, unconscious." And she goes, "Manu." And I said, "Yeah, but they said that I might get the role." Anyway, I flew back to New Zealand. I went to the Hobbit premiere, and the morning after the Hobbit premiere, I got woken up by a phone call from my agent, and she said, "Manu, they've given you the role." and it was an exceptionally different scenario of how to get a role. I know that David Rappaport has the audition in his safe, and I think one day he might release it.
That would be amazing. And isn't it the worst when you have to call the agent and be like, "I kind of did this thing. Not sure if it's going to work in my favor or not."
Well, I thought my audition for Shannara sucked, big time.
Well, I want to talk about Shannara.
I rang up my manager when I walked out of that, and I said, "I blew that one." And then she rang me back about 2 hours later and said, "What are you talking about? They loved you."
That's amazing. Well, let's take a couple questions, and we'll keep talking in between. Yes?
Hello. My question for you is actually about The Hobbit. When you were playing Azog, especially in the scene with Thorin and the Battle of the Five Armies, how did you film that? Because I mean, Richard Armitage is like 6'3" or something like that,
Yeah.
and how did that get filmed?
Okay, let me start by explaining. I wasn't the first choice for Azog. The whole film was shot with a guy that was 7 foot tall in a suit.
Okay.
It wasn't until Peter Jackson got into the editing suite and started putting the film together that he wasn't happy with the performance or the look of Azog. So they decided to digitally remove this guy's performance. I was then called down to do, the job, obviously. I was in the second last episode of filming Spartacus. My producers would never have let me do it, would never have let me go. So we snuck down to Wellington without me telling my Spartacus producers. And the funny thing about that was, I had to go down on the Friday, and we filmed over the weekend because they knew I wasn't available because of Spartacus. When I got back on Monday, my producer, during lunch at Spartacus, walked up with a newspaper and slammed it down in front of me, and there's this story. It said, Spartacus actor in Wellington filming The Hobbit. But yeah, so what I had to do was I wasn't restricted so much, but some of the fight scenes had already been filmed with Richard Armitage, and so I had to replicate some of the moves, but not all of it. I think the reason they went with the CGI and the motion capture is because they'd had so much success with Gollum. One of the funny little coincidences is that I ran into Andy Serkis like 1 year before doing The Hobbit, and him and I had about an hour's conversation in San Diego Comicon about motion capture. And it was so strange when I think that I had that meeting with him and we had this big chat about it. The next thing I made the next motion capture, character for that series. But really, what it's about is you go into a studio and you've got like this leotard on with little dots all over it. And basically any part of your body that moves, any of the joints, you've got it all over your fingers, on your face, you've got it on every little crease on your face that moves. You become kind of like an X-rayed form that they then paint Azog over. But everything that you're doing, the expression, the voice, the movement, becomes that character. That's why Andy Serkis did such a good job as Gollum. But the funny thing about it was, dressed in this bodysuit with little balls all over it, I mean, I came out, I sort of felt like somebody at some strange, German party. I sort of came out, I was like, sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I love Germany. Anyway, but I came out, and I remember just feeling at the time like I looked like a complete idiot. And, all the crew was there, and of course they'd seen a 7-foot guy before that was playing, Azog, and here I come out like this. And it really took a lot of concentration to put myself into the world that Azog was in. The night before I started filming, I actually took out Jaws, the movie Jaws, because I'd seen an image of Azog, and I thought Azog had this grey skin and this sort of teeth, and he reminded me somehow of I was trying to figure out how to make the beast, what kind of beast he was, and I didn't want to make him just a bad guy. I didn't want to just come in and go, rah, rah. I actually wanted him to have a kind of a real animalistic quality that wasn't human. And I thought to myself, like, a great white shark has just got this prowess, and it lurks. If you watch Jaws, it's the fear of it being there, but not really seeing it. You see the fin, you see the movement in the water. So when I first started my scenes with Azog, like the very first scene you see Azog, I turned my back to the camera. Like Peter was going, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I don't want them to see the teeth, especially." So I turned my back, and the guy came in and said, "Oh, Josiah, we lost the hobbits, they got away or something." And I kind of just turned like this much, and I sort of said some words. And then when I turned around, I kind of like didn't really look up. I sort of looked at this. I said, "Pete, can there be a warg on the ground, and can I pat the warg?" Like there was nothing there, but he put the warg there for me. And I came down, I sort of run my thing, and then I said, when I come up to this small orc, can I just stroke his head like he's a child? And sort of speak with this Gundinizi Gundinas. And then I threw him into the wolves, and the wolves tore him to pieces. But it was kind of like building up to it. I just wanted it to be really, really cruisy, like dun 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 dun. And yeah, I think it paid off, yeah. But, you know, it was that, and I also got out Empire Strikes Back. And all I could think of was trying to make a voice that was like James Earl Jones. And so I just, you know, I mean, I really relished doing the voice for Azog. It was a really interesting process because we did it in ADR. You know, we filmed it and you had the live voice take, but then we got to go into the studio and do it. And what they did was they used the decoder to drop my voice a whole octave. So it was deep. You know, I've got a fairly deep voice, so I'm going to go, "Oobakdil, oobnak," you know, something like that. It's deep. But then they put a leopard growl filter through it as well. So it was sort of rolling. I was going, "Oobakdil, oobnak." Kind of had this. But when I was doing it in the studio, it was like having a didgeridoo. It felt more like I was playing an instrument than actually talking. You know, this wonderful synthesized sound. So I had so much fun doing his voice. It was really cool. Anyway, does that sort of semi-answer the question?
It does, and you were fantastic in The Hobbit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hey.
Why, hi there, Wade.
Anyway. How did it feel to actually become Slade in Arrow?
The funny thing is, kid,
Really?
is when I arrived in Canada, when I did the audition, it wasn't actually Slade Wilson on the page. And they'd kept it completely under wraps. To this day, I don't know how we signed a contract, not even knowing that I was going to play, you know, that pivotal character. But we did. We just, you know, all I knew that I was playing this military guy, right? And when I arrived in Vancouver Airport, I was going through customs, and I had to go get this particular piece of paper signed so I could work there. And my manager rang me, and she said, "Manu, look up EW on your phone, and you'll see they've released that you've been cast in the role." And so I'm standing like probably about 2 meters from the counter where I'm about to do these forms, and I'm talking to her on the phone, and I said, they've got it wrong. I didn't read for Slade Wilson. Like, I read for like it was another name completely. And she went, "Oh, well, they must have been keeping it secret." And I went, "Slade Wilson." And the guy behind the counter at immigration said, "Are you playing Slade Wilson, man?" And I was like, "I don't know."
I guess so.
And he was like, "Man, he's badass, man." Like, and that was the first thing I ever heard about the character. Was the guy at customs told me who I was going to be. It was funny. But to be honest, when I got to work with Steve, you know, up in Canada, it was a whole new episode for me being up there. You know, it was a very interesting environment. They've got a great outdoor kind of, you know, environment for filming the island of Lian-Yu. You know, we had some really remarkable spots that you know, you woke up in the morning and you're going like, "Wow, this is fantastic. Oh, what's that on the ground?" It's a bear shit. A what? A bear poo. I'm like, "It's steaming. Where's the bear?" You know? Like, honestly, there was bears around. It was kind of crazy. And, but, you know, like, starting to finesse that particular relationship with Steve and Amel was really wonderful. You know, Steve's got such a, you know, I thought that was some great stuff that we did on the island. You know, Steve was always, you know, very, you know, innocent in his performance on the island. You know, this young man kind of like just trying to survive, and I was like this old guy trying to help the young man survive, and we were just brushing off each other, trying to toughen up. And then Shadow comes along, right? She's wonderful, the girl that played Shadow. She was such a good fun girl to work with. She was wonderful. But we'd done a couple of episodes, and then I'd said to one of the producers, "Isn't it a bit strange that there's 2 men on an island and this girl shows up and none of us look at her?" And he told me that because I said that to him, they made this decision to have this love triangle. And they just rang me and said, "As of tomorrow's episode, you're in love with Shadow." Really? Okay. And, you know, and from that point, we then started building that dark shadow, you know, that would eventually become Deathstroke. And in the outplay of it, it was interesting. You know, I always wanted to really hold true to DC's Deathstroke. the man who stood for the death of his son at the hands of the Teen Titans and said, now it's my time for vengeance, to become Deathstroke. And, I always try to hold on to this thing that he wasn't doing things crazy, that there was always this deep honor or this deep dedication to it. I think when I read the script where I killed Oliver's mother, I was like, uh-oh. we're going full on evil with Deathstroke, and it was just interesting. It just kept on developing and developing, and I don't know, the stuff in the city was just really fantastic. I remember doing that scene with Oliver in the house, when we shook hands, and it was like, it's good to see you again, Mr. Queen. And it was just this moment. We just knew it was going to just go accelerate, get darker and darker. But just a wonderful opportunity. Another wonderful character to play. And Slade Wilson is. I think there's just so much more to it. The fans are all kind of going crazy about seeing more of that on the show. But I'm not in power of the pen, so I just wait for the phone call. But I hope for the fans of Arrow's sake that they do bring that story around again, because.
I hope so too, and I hope that they stick more. I don't know. In the comics, it took the whole Justice League to come and defeat.
I'm not going to go into that.
I know, but I would be nice to see that. That truth and strength, like still.
Absolutely, yeah.
Still shown through the character.
Yeah.
So okay, great. Thank you. Hi.
Hello. Thanks for being here, Mr. Bennett. I thought it was really interesting describing the way you do the hukka to get that primal state going on for your warrior characters. But with somebody like Azog, who is an incredibly primal tribal figure, yet it's under all this artificiality with the CGI, does that change the way you get there, getting back to that ancestral state, or is there a different technique you use to sort of become this character who's very primal and tribal, yet is also just this special effect?
Yeah, good question. As I said, I had so little time to prepare for Azog. Literally, I got rung up on a Tuesday, and I was there on the Friday. And I didn't read any scripts. Peter Jackson never emails scripts. You never get them. You don't get them until you get to your hotel room. And so I think I arrived at like 8 o'clock at night, having filmed Spartacus that day. And I got this script in my hotel room, and it was all written in black speech, which you just can't make any sense of. And then they had me ring this guy at so now it's like 9 o'clock at night. I'm on the phone to some dialogue coach, and he's saying to me, this is how you pronounce it. And I was just like, you know what, I can't learn this by the morning. We're going to have to write out cue cards. So, I did phonetically the way that I thought that I would see the word and say it. We did all these cue cards, and there were guys standing around the studio. So wherever I turned as Azog, there was some guy holding up this Obak Tilubnak. Gundenese, It was a very strange. I'm telling you, it was a very, very, very different process, and tough. It was very demanding for me, for anybody as an actor to work in motion capture is tough. But because I had so little time, I remember just saying to myself, get out Jaws. Just get out Jaws. That was my instinct.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did, because it gave me this sense of movement, and I consistently used that slow, menacing, but not. But I wasn't. I honestly just didn't want to be this, this kind of bad guy. So I made up certain things as well, like when I was sitting on the warg, the wolf.
Yeah.
Well, in the studio, that was just a big green pommel horse with two guys standing on either side, sort of shaking it. I fell off it twice. I fell off because I made this decision. I said, Peter, because I think one of the first scenes we ever shot was the last scene of the first movie, where I rode down on the wargs and they went up the tree. Gandalf and Thorin and all the guys were up the tree, and then they started lighting those pine cones and throwing them down at the wargs, and the wargs were all freaking out. Well, that was sort of one of the first scenes we ever shot. I'm sitting on this pommel horse, and I had no idea what it was, And I said, Pete, what is this? And he said, oh, it's a giant wolf called a warg. And I was like, oh, okay. Sort of sitting on it like this, And this is where it ended. It didn't have a head. And I'm sort of sitting there going like, okay, I can imagine this big wolf. How big's its head? Like, does it go all the way out here? And he said, yeah, well, and he came out and he pointed out its head was all the way out here somewhere, you know. And I'm sitting there and there's nothing in front of me and I'm in this silly little suit, as I said, you know, and you know, there's nothing, it's a complete sterile space, it's a studio. And he's going, okay, you're gonna ride down, there's gonna be these giant trees in front of you. So I'm looking up at nothing. And there's no Thorin Oakenshield, there's no Gandalf, there's nobody in front of me, there's just like those lights. So I look like an idiot. I'm sitting on a pommel horse. There's a giant wolf trying to become Azog the Orc, you know. And I said, Pete, just 1 second before we go, am I going to ride this giant wolf in all 3 movies? And he said, yeah, it's yours. You know, it's your own warg. And I said, well, you know, is it special? Like, did I potentially like go to a litter and go like, I want that one, and then sort of raised him and Pete's like, and I said, well, you know, like, I'm the white orc, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, maybe I like the albino puppy, you know, the white one, and I picked the white one. And maybe it could be a white orc, a white warg, and that's why we ended up with the white warg, you know. And then it was kind of like, in this particular scene, I ride down. And it says that I turn to the other orcs and I say, Gundenizi, Gundenast, which is, can you smell the fear? But I thought that was a better line. I said, Pete, can I deliver it to the warg that's not there? And my arm gets chopped off as well, doesn't it? We hadn't done the scene yet when my arm got chopped off, but I knew that I was going to end up with this pitchfork. And he said, yeah. And I said, which arm's the pitchfork arm? And he said, it's your left hand. And I said, okay. So, like dogs like to get the back of their neck scratched, right? So I said, in this scene, can I lean down and scratch the back of my warg's head with my pitchfork? And basically, you know, say to my dog, can you smell the fear? Because I'm going to feed you. It's lunchtime, you know? And so it kind of totally, instead of coming down going like, Gundenizi, Gundenast, you know, bad guys, we're bad guys. It became Gundenizi, Gundenast. And it just changed the tone of it completely, eh? And I was really proud of that choice. That moment of taking that time, and Pete kind of said to me later on, you know, he said that was great moment, you know, good moment to choose. But you know, I mean, it was that difficult to try to sort of figure out how to do things in certain ways because nobody was there, you know. But it was just that moment was probably one of my finest moments, I think, of making a choice as an actor, and because I always think that, you know, audiences are only interested in relationship, you know. And I thought that if Azog could have a relationship, it would change the way you looked at him. Yeah. And even though it was subtle, it was there. It's always there. You know, as I said, the first scene where I walked down the stairs, I walked down and I asked Peter to put the warg there, and I just walked past and I'm doing this. And it completely diffuses that, you know, if you saw Adolf Hitler, let's say, walking down Nuremberg and he stopped and he patted a dog, you know what I mean? You change the gear. Yeah. You change the gear, which is in everybody. And it's interesting sort of just, you know, trying to do stuff like that.
It was a great moment. And I love hearing the story about how it evolved into that. Thank you, Manu, for sharing that. Thank you for that great question. We have time for one more question.
Oh, sorry, guys. I'm notoriously long answers.
But they're good. I mean, you actually are giving like stuff that no one's heard. So
I'm sorry, guys. Hey, come down later to the table or something, and I'll answer it.
Go ahead.
As an actor, when you have to do these really intense scenes where you dive into the character, really look at the emotion and take that on, how do you, at the end of the day, come back to Manu and snap out of it?
Well, look, I profess that I'm a product of my own life, okay? You know, I'm an artist, you know, and I chose art. Art chose me, you know. It was a funny relationship I've formed with art, and how I present myself as an artist is based upon, just trying to find true emotion. But when I was 14, 15 years old, my mother was killed in a car accident, and I was in that car accident. And so the scars that I have on my forehead, people often say like, "Oh, we thought that was makeup," and I go, "No, these are my own. These are my own." But then like 2 weeks after my mother passed away, my brother was killed in a separate car accident, and he actually died in my hands. So I was young, and I needed somewhere to direct, my energy, my sorrow, my grief, my anger, all these different things. I had a girlfriend at the time who was a ballerina, and she said, "Come to the dance studio, come and dance." And so I did that, and I found this really beautiful connection with ballet, because I did pas de deux work. I was good at lifting the girls around, and I was a strong young guy. I sort of would do the pas de deux work, but that was kind of like trying to reach out to a female dancer was like trying to reach out to my mother again. My mother was a piano player, and she left the piano in the house, and so I picked up the keys and just started playing by ear. The first song I ever learnt was "Endless Love." Can you believe this is Deathstroke? Like, I want the scene at the table with Oliver and going, "Let me tell you something, kid. I know how to play Endless Love." But, and then funnily enough, when I did my premiere of Spartacus, which was the first premiere I ever did in America, I went to a restaurant afterwards, and Lionel Richie was in the restaurant, and I walked up and I said, "Mr. Richie, I have to tell you something. I'm here for the first premiere of my life in America." And the moment I changed and found art was when I lifted up this keyboard and I played your song, "Endless Love." And then he said, "Oh, come and sit down here, boy." And at the time I was with a friend of mine. She's this beautiful Italian girl, and he was like, "Oh, what's your phone number?" And she told me, "You're so funny." No, he's classic. No, but he gave her a job as a bass player in a studio band. Anyway, just going back to that. So here I was at this age, and I just found the arts were just an awesome way to find a way to channel it positively, because I came from a steel city. I could have fallen into the cracks very easily. It gave me a channel, and I've always believed that what it is that I possess as a result of that is just a signal or some paint color, but I've had to learn through the craft of acting how to apply it. And your question about stepping out of the role, you see, I celebrate the ability to be able to use it. I really do. Every time that I get the opportunity to go in front of that camera, I celebrate the fact that I can use that emotion. So if a guy comes to me direct from Afghanistan, and I've met a lot of soldiers, PTSD boys, and they come and they go, "Manu, all us boys were watching it while we were up in Afghanistan, and really, like, Crixus and Spartacus, you guys really helped inspire us." And I'm standing there going like, I'm an actor. But then I realize that my brother died in my hands, right? And so when I play Crixus, my conviction is centered around all of these things that I try to make really tangible in terms of the real emotional signal I'm sending through that rectangle, in your living rooms. And, I think that's why, that they make that connection, like, a guy like that will say that, and then I go, "I know how you feel." And that's an important thing, it's just an important thing. But moving on through my life, I just like anybody, I had to find the real ways to sort of get the opportunities. And there's no I don't know what it is. There's no secret formula, but just a lot of time and hard work and getting rejected for roles and not giving up and just keeping on going and going and going. And especially being around good mentors. It's always important to find good mentors, because you can't do anything on your own in this world, kid.
Of course.
Thank you. And Manu, you are
Yeah.
a true talent. I mean, what you bring to each of your characters, there is, some may think your characters are, on the page they could be played one-dimensionally, but what you have is there's such depth and insight, and you really become empathetic towards characters that, maybe you wouldn't expect to at the start of the season or something. So you're amazing. Thank you for spending this hour with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
My
pleasure. Thank you.
You can, of course, see Manu downstairs today, tomorrow, one more time. Big round of applause, Manu Bennett.
Thank you. Cheers. I appreciate it. Hey.